Well, a severe weather warning has been issued in parts of northeastern New South Wales, where heavy rainfall may lead to flash flooding across parts of the northern tablelands, the northwest slopes and plains. Wee Waa is expected to remain isolated for the next week as the flood peak remains high. Joining me live now is Nationals MP Michael McCormack on Wagga Wagga Local. Thanks so much for your time. I tell you what, farmers,
Pleasure,
rural people, rural constituents have had a hell of a time over the last year. Tell us, with these slow-moving floods, how big is the problem?
It's a huge problem for them because, as you say, for the first time for a long time, they looked to be going to get a bumper crop. And of course, they had the mice plague earlier in the year that ravaged a lot of the countryside. Now, finally, they looked as though they were going to get a great crop off. Mark Colton tells me that many farmers have been able to get in, and probably 50% have been able to actually strip their crops. They went early, but for some, they can't get their headers or harvesters into bogged paddocks because they're just so saturated. There's so much water about. And in other cases, particularly around the Liverpool Plains, around the Lachlan River, the paddocks are just underwater and the crops are literally underwater. And so that's going to be devastating for all of those wheat crops, canola, chickpeas and others. And so it's really disappointing for the farmers.
When we're seeing, all these towns are being evacuated as well, is there a broader conversation that needs to be had about the level of the levees in and around some of these towns when we're seeing once in a 100-year floods?
Oh, look, indeed, and that's why in my hometown of Wagga Wagga I fought so hard to get $9 million for a levee bank to protect the city against the Murrumbidgee River. Of course, at Forbes, they want to see, most of the townspeople want to see Wyangla Dam increased from 85 metres to 95 metres, the dam wall. At the moment, the estimates are that it's going to cost $650 million. That's going to also provide another 650 gigalitres of capacity. The benefits from that, productive water for use for farms, even when it gets dry again, to store that water in times of saturation and heavy deluges is going to be incredibly important for the Lachlan Valley.
Do we need to rethink our priorities here? I mean, when you're looking at flooding, you never waste a crisis, and you use that leverage, as I'm sure the people of Forbes will and have, to try and get things done. I mean, these things stall because politicians seem to move on and forget after the floodwaters recede.
Well, I've never forgotten. It was my October 2010 inaugural address. I spoke about the need to build more dams, and certainly when I had the capacity to do so, we started and finished Scottsdale Dam in northeast Tasmania. I want to build more dams. I want to see it done, but of course we can't do it without the states say so. We're getting on and we're building Rookwood Weir as we speak. There's 200 workers on site there, and dozens and dozens of heavy excavators. The Emu Swamp Dam near Stanthorpe in Queensland, it's on the go, but we need to build, of course, Dungowan Dam and raise the wall of Wyangla in New South Wales. We need a willing state government. They've said they're willing, but of course there's biodiversity offsets that's causing an issue, and of course the cost of it, the sheer cost of it. But I think the cost of it is a drop in the ocean compared to the savings that you do when you don't have the damage, when you don't have towns like Forbes having to evacuate 600 houses, when you don't have farmers losing their crops for the first time, when they're potentially going to have a great yield. So it's the savings cost is incredible.
Well, let's talk about what the federal government did have control over, and that was issuing visas to skilled and unskilled workers to come in and help these farmers produce and get as much money out of this bumper crop. That just didn't happen.
Indeed.
Why not?
Well, the ag visa is still in play, and I just spoke to David Littleproud a few moments before coming on air, and we're still very hopeful that we're going to be able to continue to work with those Southeast Asian countries. And of course, we've had the arrangements in place with our Pacific friends for many, many years, and I know how important that is to get skilled and unskilled workers into work in meat processing plants, fruit picking, but as you say, in the agriculture sector generally. If we're going to get agriculture to a $100 billion enterprise by 2030, then we're going to need foreign labour. And of course, we're at the moment, because of COVID restrictions and travel limitations, 90,000 backpackers short of where we would normally be, Laura.
That's my point. It's too late. I mean, a lot of this crop is now either underwater or it's too late to be picked?
Well, and to be fair, whilst a lot of the cropping, the harvesting is done by contract labourers who come down and they bring heavy gear, and they often come down from Queensland. State borders haven't helped the situation. State border closures have not helped the situation. They mainly rely on Australian contractors. Of course, yes, there is a foreign labour force element there, but for these farmers who have the grain harvest, it is mainly Australian labour, and it is very difficult to get from state to state because of the restrictions put in place. But the Nationals have fought hard to make sure that ag visa workforce issue was resolved, and of course we're working through that so that the cherries at Young, for instance, can be picked this year.
May election, is that what we're looking at here?
Well, that's what it looks as though, and of course the sitting calendar was put out yesterday. There's a provision there for, well, it'll be up to the Prime Minister, of course, Laura, as you know. He's the only one who knows what timeline there is going to be. I'm expecting a May election, but of course there's plenty of pundits out there who'll say March 2, and that'll be a conversation. Look, let's get to Christmas. I think people are very much looking forward.
When the purse strings and the financials are the way they are?
Well, business is very confident though, Laura, and I know there's a sense of pessimism perhaps amongst some in Canberra, but out in the real world, there are a lot of businesses very optimistic about the future. There are plenty of jobs in regional Australia for those people willing to move to the country areas and take up those opportunities. Cheaper housing, affordable housing, and jobs are plenty. And I know that business, having spoken to any number of business people in recent months, they're confident about the future, and many of them are doing quite well on the back of the substantial investments that the federal government made to keep their doors open, to keep their workers still engaged with their firms and factories.
Interesting indeed. Michael McCormack, thanks so much. We'll speak soon.
Always a pleasure, Laura.